You're listening to the Gap Podcast with your host, me, Morgan McGill. As we talk God and politics, my prayer is that you're inspired and encouraged to be a part of filling the God-sized gap in the political sphere. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to The Gap. I'm your host, Morgan McGill, and I'm very excited for today's guest. He is a friend of mine, and he is politically active and in ministry, which is like me. So it's pretty great.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to have this conversation. Chris Sheridan, welcome to The Gap.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So let's hop right into it. How did you get involved in politics? I know you've been in ministry longer than you've been in politics.
Yeah.
So what did that transition look like for you?
Yeah. So I first started, so in city of Chula Vista is where I'm kind of born and raised. Went to high school there. Yeah, kind of right out of high school, started attending a church called Eastlake out in that area, and just started getting involved in ministry. Really felt like that was a call in my life. Stepped in and out in different seasons. Have also been very active in the marketplace and have been a business owner. Getting out of ministry, I got into like marketing is kind of my background, and so had a marketing and web development company for quite a few years. And in that season, actually was, I think the year was probably 2015 or so, 2016. The city of Chula Vista passed a half-cent sales tax. It's neither here nor there, but one of the big things that I actually started just kind of digging into the data of where the city was at. And at the time, the city had $180 million pension deficit. And ironically enough, when they would pass that half-cent sales tax, it actually added up to be $180 million over 10 years. And so I kind of had some red flags go off and was just like, that's not inconsequential.
Yeah.
What's going on there? And so part of that legislation was that it was really all meant for infrastructure. The city of Chula Vista had some infrastructure deficits, big time. I was at the time really involved in my son's Little League, and the Parks and Recs department was just like not well maintained across the city. And then roads and kind of everything else was just really falling behind in the west side of Chula Vista where I lived and I kind of grew up. And so they fortunately included in that half-cent sales tax a need for like an oversight committee for the citizens to oversee where is the finances actually going. And so I applied. I reached out to my local city council member and just said, look, you don't know who I am. I sit on the board of this Little League. I am a business owner. I'm in finance. I understand some of this stuff. He had no idea who I was. I was like nobody that was actively involved anywhere. And so he ended up meeting with me, and I just kind of shared, like, look, I really want to see things change in the city, and so I would like to be a part of this. So I applied. He nominated me. I ended up getting selected. So I sat on the Citizens Oversight Committee for Prop P for 2.5 years.
Wow.
And it was good. It was a really good learning experience. Some of what I saw was, unfortunately, the money went exactly where it was supposed to go. And actually, Chula Vista has done a really good job of making sure that those funds have been utilized for infrastructure, parks, and roads and everything else. But ultimately, that group, the oversight committee, was really just kind of like a rubber stamp. And it had really no power. And so there was really no like valuable feedback. And so I kind of just got frustrated and was like, okay, when my term's done, I'm done. I'm not going to renew or try to do anything else here. And so that was kind of my first step into the kind of local political sphere. And I kind of went from there. I ended up finding Awaken, what used to be C3, in 2021. Was coming off of another business industry that I was in that was really, really regulated. And I just wanted to get connected. So I started plugging into the church. I went through Pathfinders and just kind of learned a lot about really what it meant for Christians to be engaged in the 7 spheres of influence. And so I really just felt like I should utilize the skill set that God gave me, which is really being focused in marketing and in strategy and really kind of leaning into that. And so from there, a really good friend of mine and mentor, Marco Contreras, was running for city council, and I I just felt like I was supposed to help him. And so I reached out and just said, hey, I don't know what you have as far as marketing goes, as far as strategy goes, but I think I could help. I could add some really cool things into your campaign. And so I jumped in there and started really just kind of working with him on how to segment out walking, which is actually a really big thing that I think we haven't really tackled very well in the kind of Republican side of things, and actually engaging the voter base. And it was really interesting on that side to see if that is actually done really well. I think you could actually see a lot of cities and districts flip and go the right way. I think a lot of Christians, a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans are just so disheartened by the state of things, especially in California, especially Southern California, that they aren't really activated. And so that was how I kind of got into it. I still do some campaign stuff for a couple people, and really I'm just leaning into like the skill set that I already have in marketing and strategy, and kind of helping campaigns in any way I can that way. So.
I love that you just leaned into what God had gifted you with, like your gifts that God has given you, because I feel too many people, they try and reinvent the wheel, or they try and do things that they're not necessarily skilled in, because they feel like, I need to be involved in the political sphere. I'm not good with people, but I'm going to run for office. And it's like, well, you can influence the political sphere in a different way. Yeah. You don't have to necessarily be a candidate. And I love that you're on the marketing side, because that's actually really important. That is what the majority of people see. Yeah. That is like you're the front facing, like digital and ads and all, and the messaging really behind the candidate. And I don't think enough people really think about that part of politics. So what did that kind of look like for you with Marco's campaign? What did you learn, and what did you apply from what you already knew to that campaign, and how did that look?
Yeah, so I think the number one, so where I kind of started with that is a big portion of my background is really in branding. And I think that's actually something that a lot of people don't really lean into in political campaigns, is they kind of just do the generic baseline red, blue, like, and that's it. Like, and they don't really put a lot of thought into crafting an identity around who they actually are. And so that was something I really leaned into with Marco's campaign directly, like right off the rip, is just making it him. And I felt like the more that we did that he would own it, and he would be proud about it, and he would really kind of back it. And so that was kind of where we started. But some of the big takeaways that I had from that entire campaign was really the biggest piece that I think we could have done better, and that I would implement sooner in campaigns going forward, is really understanding the time frames around where things are absolutely necessary. Knowing when ballots are actually going to drop, knowing what is the actual sense of urgency of the last 2 weeks of a campaign, and preemptively having all of the infrastructure already in place to do that part really, really well. We spent probably 6 weeks in advance of actual voting day getting out and walking and doing some of those things. And that was helpful, but it really wasn't, it didn't really move the needle. I feel like, I think had we really kind of stacked everything to being like the last 2 weeks and just been really active those 2 weeks, and really hit prime time, people at home hours, I feel like we would have really moved the needle a lot bigger. And so kind of leading up to that window, it's really all branding. It's name recognition. It's getting people familiar with who your candidate is. And so for me, it was really spending money the right way. And I think honestly, this probably will ruffle some feathers, but I think the tendency a lot of times is to do the same old because it's what we're used to. The mailers, the print pieces, stuff like that. Most people
throw those away.
Most people throw them away. I throw them away. Like, I don't really care. And you spend a lot of money on it. And so I think that there are ways to change that dynamic and to really help benefit some name recognition. Honestly, in the digital age, like, we are seeing things change from a marketing standpoint. We are seeing user engagement on apps like TikTok. We're seeing things that, like, especially going into campaigns for this next season, like, there's a lot of things that can be done to actually get the eyes of people who are out there that aren't the traditional marketing strategies. And so between that and then also, like, another big piece that I think I would really lean into more heavily now is understanding who does what and how to leverage that for a candidate. The Republican Party in San Diego being a good example of that, how to raise money the right way, how to allocate funds and resources, how to really implement strategies that actually make sense from a big picture standpoint. That's a big part of what I think I would really kind of focus in on now is how to strategize a little bit better from a higher level, and really kind of put all your pieces on the board and understanding what does what, who does what, and how, and leaning into some of those things.
Friends, in over 15 years in the political sphere, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen amazing men and women forego running for office because they have no idea where to start. And on the other side of that, I can't tell you how many times I have seen amazing candidates fumble the ball so hard because they have no idea what they're doing when they decide to run for office. That is why I founded Revival Consulting. The heart of this company is to help God-fearing men and women get elected to local, state, and federal office, because we see a country where the men and women in positions of political power and influence know and love God. If that's you, if you're considering running for office but you have no idea where to start, or you need help, go to itsrevival.com and fill out our consultation form, because we want to help you. We need your voice now more than ever. If you have seen anything that's going on in the world today, you know that you were put on this planet for such a time as this, and we need you. So please don't hesitate. Go to itsrevival.com and fill out our consultation form today. Yeah, you mentioned walking earlier, and I really want to lean into that, because I feel like a lot of people, when they volunteer for a campaign, they'll do anything but talk to people. Yeah. And that's like, you see that all the time. I've been on a lot of campaigns. I've campaigned myself, and I've managed a lot of campaigns. And I've seen this time and time again where people feel like, I want to volunteer and I want to help this candidate, but I will not talk to voters. And that is like the vast majority of people. And how did I know Marco did a great job with getting people to like actually walk. The number of people who actually walked and knocked on doors for his campaign was something we hadn't seen in a really long time. Yeah. So how did you guys get people on board to do something that's, for most people, really scary? Yeah. I think that one was, identifying the right people was kind of a big part of it, and not even necessarily the right people to just go out and talk. We engaged a lot of people who were maybe intimidated or afraid, but even addressing that, like as we did some training, right? Like you utilize the technology that you have, and you train people on it. But in those kinds of environments, you also use as an opportunity to speak directly to some of the kind of maybe common misconceptions that drive the fear that people may like have in their mind around why they don't want to do those things. What we ended up finding was that like the vast majority of conversations we had were people who were politically disengaged. And like we did that on purpose, right? Like we actually identified who are the people who didn't vote in the last two elections, who are registered Republicans that we can actually go talk to try and get activated in this specific campaign. And what we ended up finding is that as those people opened their doors and would have conversations with us, they were happy about it. They were happy about having conversations, and they were excited to see that people actually were still active and cared and were advocating for a candidate that was in alignment with their values and their core beliefs. And so
I think that was something that like we actually did learn that early on in the campaign, and as we started getting more people involved, that we just kind of directly addressed and said, hey, hey, you actually don't need to be afraid of this, because it's not like you're going and talking to the other side. Like people are so afraid of conflict that they don't. That's the fear motivator. They're afraid of being in an argument or into a debate with somebody or getting a door slammed in their face. Like they're afraid of those things, but that's not actually the reality of what you're experiencing when you go walk in a very strategic, like implemented strategy. And so that was really kind of the number one thing, is really just helping people understand, like, it's an unfound fear. You don't really need to be afraid of what that is, and then preparing them. Yeah. Give them a script, give them talking points, give them a survey of things to ask, and then, having a leave behind piece, or having something that addresses the candidate you want to specifically go after. We ended up doing a collaboration even with John McCann around that as well, and making sure that we were talking about multiple candidates at the same time and not just one. So that was actually really, really helpful as well, as people, when they understand, and that's actually a part of the strategy too, is actually using somebody who maybe has more name recognition in a campaign like that, where there's multiple candidates running for different positions, using strategies like that for collaboration to actually drive some additional name recognition was actually something we did a little late in the game that I think would really have helped us as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And on conflict, when people are knocking on doors and they think that they don't want, like, they're like, I can't talk to someone who disagrees with me because I don't want to get a door slammed in my face. I've actually never even experienced that with people who disagree with me. Yeah. I've experienced people saying, like, why are you here? I don't agree with you, but never. The only times I've experienced people like get upset is if you knock on their door too late at night.
Totally.
And so it's funny to me that that's like what people. I mean, and it's also the spirit of fear. Yeah. There's a spiritual component, right? The enemy doesn't want you engaging with the other side. And it's funny because you look at the other side and they don't have a problem with conflict. They don't have a problem engaging with us, but for some reason we have a fear of engaging with them, and it's definitely, I feel, a spiritual component to it. Totally. It's like the enemy's like, no, you can't talk to them. You're like, no one's going to listen to you. But that's really how we change hearts and minds, right? Jesus is a prime example. He went in where he was not welcome, and he changed hearts and minds by speaking truth in dark situations. Yeah. So my encouragement to people is always, don't be afraid of people, because we're all human, right? We all have the same, we're all thinking the same things. I did want to ask you, because you did go in from ministry to politics, and what have you noticed as someone in both spheres now, with other people in the church? Like, what are some of the things that you've noticed of maybe like political apathy or different things that you want to speak into? Because having that knowledge of both sides puts you at a different place than, someone who's just in ministry or just in politics.
Yeah, I think, honestly, it's a pride thing, actually. This is probably a different dynamic than what you would think. People want to be proud about what they do. And there's an element of being in ministry and being a pastor, or even serving at your local church, that people, whether subconsciously or they want to admit it or not, they use it as a badge of honor around something that they can tout as being, I'm a good person. Yeah. And I think that's on one side, and then on the other, we view politicians as the antithesis of that. Wow. And so we kind of subconsciously or intentionally actually opt out of the latter, because we don't want to be associated with those people. Wow. And it's kind of the tax collector dynamic. Like, politicians today are our local tax collector. we don't see the IRS. We don't see who those people are. We don't know who they are. But politicians are our modern day tax collectors. Yeah. And so when you look even at the times and you look at like Jesus ate with the tax collectors, he sat down with them, he engaged them. Like, wow. That's our today's politician. And so I think there's this thing in our cultural society now that's like, oh, I would rather be over here than over here. But we fail to recognize that like, that's actually who Jesus was hanging out with too. Yeah. And that's the people we should be spending time with, because the reality is like the reason we associate those things is because we associate influence with power, and we associate power with greed and selfishness. And so when you look at it through that lens, people want to avoid it as opposed to engaging it, because they're honestly afraid of their own sinfulness. And they're afraid of that. They don't want to be viewed and associated and attached to that, because they want to be able to keep up their own perception and perspective of who they are. And so I think that for me, as I'm talking to Christians and talking to fellow believers, like, you're a Christian, you're going to heaven. You're good. Yeah. You don't have to worry about being associated with somebody who would fall in that category. And so why not use our time on this earth as a weapon, as a tool, as a mechanism for engaging those people in a way that actually makes sense to turn their hearts, because Jesus loves them too, last time I checked. Yeah. But also as a way of creating an environment where our families and our children and our grandchildren can actually thrive. Yeah. And, you know, the Bible says a wise man, a good man, leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And we view that associated to wealth and finances. But the reality is that is environment as well. And so for me, when I look at my kids and my grandkids, like, it's not just about the world that we live in and leaving them a better, like, it's like, what are you actually setting them up to have? And so it's why, like, at the local level, I really wanted to get involved. It's where I grew up. It's where my kids are growing up. It's where my grandkids are probably going to grow up. Like, that's the environment that they're living in. And that's their inheritance. What I'm laying the foundation for today is the inheritance that they get in the future. And so that applies to every area of life. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of the dynamic that I would encourage people to look at, is like, it's not as bad as you think it is. Don't get me wrong. Like, it can get pretty bad. Oh, yeah. I've been up to Sacramento. Yeah. Like, I've been around politicians at that level, and it can get pretty dark. But I think the thing is, for most people, like, especially at the local level, get engaged and get involved at the local level. Like, you want to actually make a difference in what your family's life looks like 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. Get engaged at the local level. Yeah. And that's what ends up happening. We end up seeing that take place, and that's how you flip districts. That's how you flip cities. That's how you see cultural change take place for the better in your local area. And then that does start transcending its way up. It doesn't work the other way. It doesn't start at the top and whittle its way down. It starts at the bottom and moves on its way up. And so that would be my encouragement, is get involved in that level. And then honestly, like, I think I'll probably get involved in local politics myself at some point, like, in the future. I'm 36. I don't look it because I got a lot of white hair, but, like, I got a lot of life left in me. Yeah. And I think when the timing's right, like, that'll be something that happens. But, like, if you can't do that yourself, find someone who you like, that you can trust, and actually go build a relationship with them. Mm-hmm. Like, one of the things that I learned pretty early on that I thought was really interesting is what I actually did with that oversight committee was really eye-opening, because what ends up happening, especially in local politics, is people who sit on those committees are the ones who eventually end up running for offices. Mm-hmm. And it's just because of name recognition.
They're building those relationships.
They're building their relationships, right? Like, I got to meet the city manager. I got to meet the chief engineer.
Because they show up at your meetings.
Yeah, because you, like, and then they start asking you questions, and they start understanding who are you as an individual. Yeah. And so, like, you know, water boards and, like, education boards and, like, all of those dynamics, like planning groups, all of it. But even oversight committees, and even, like, arts and entertainment at the local city level, like, all of those different things, they all matter. And whatever the affinity that you have, whatever background you have, there's an opportunity for you to go serve your city in that capacity as well. And the reality is, we need more people engaged there. And so that's kind of what I think I would say around that topic.
I love that you are focused on the local level and you are encouraging people the same, because I see too often people get really passionate and they go straight for like the federal office or straight for the big seat. And that's like, it's great and all, but the real change happens at the local level. I mean, a freshman congressman has like zero power and influence.
Yeah.
But a city council member, and you look at these races too, like the city council races are super intense on like when you get to these like local races, because the people with the money realize that that's what's actually going to change their city, is if they can flip a city council, if they can flip a school board, they can control what the kids are being taught, they can control what happens in your city. And I think too many people are focused on like over here, like the shiny thing, like look over here, when really all the change is happening over here. And too many people will take their eyes off of their local community. And
I think it's really important too, like even with those, like the state assembly races and things like that may not feel like they're massive, like, but they are. They're big. Those are big races. Yeah. They require a good amount of money. And like, it's like any other industry, if you really think about it, right? Like nobody jumps into a company and just becomes CEO from day one.
Nope.
Like it doesn't happen that way. Like you work your way up through the organization. You climb the ladder. And the reality is that's what happens. And then the political level, political arena as well, is you start at the local level. You start on a committee. You start in a planning group. You start somewhere there to get name recognition, to get the relationships cultivated and built, to understand who are the people that are playing, who are the people who are involved. And then you start working your way towards those things, because people, they want to know you. We don't want an unknown candidate. Whether you're a Republican or Democrat, I want to know you and know your track record. I want to know what you stand for. And so that happens when you demonstrate faithfulness over time. Like I learned this pretty early on in my
just like you don't walk into a church and become a pastor. Like,
totally.
Yeah.
I learned this pretty early on in my marriage, that the definition of trust is faithfulness over time. And so for people to trust you, you need to demonstrate faithfulness over a period of time. And so if you start at the local level, then you can start moving into the more regional things and to state and then the national level. And I think people can sometimes just feel like, oh, I can I have a backing, or I have a solid group of people who are behind me. And we underestimate the amount of energy it takes to actually go do that thing. And then we underestimate how much name recognition makes an impact. John McCain's a great example of that. Like people trust him, people know him. Like it's why he's sitting on a city council with 4 Democrats and he's the lone Republican right now as the mayor. Because people know his name, they trust him, they recognize who he is. And so even though the other 4 districts may have gone to Democrats in those races, people know and trust him because he's been involved at the local level. And he's himself expressed no desire for higher political office. He loves the city of Chula Vista. He wants to be there. And I think that actually says a lot, and people can trust that. They can back that. And they vouch for you on that level.
And it shows in his track record of all the offices he's served in Chula Vista. Like he's never left. And so that says a lot about his character too.
Totally.
I do want to, before we wrap up, ask you to speak into people who are listening and don't know where to start, or feel like the political sphere isn't for them. Like, I am of the belief that we all as Christians have a part to play, like the body of Christ. We all have a part to play in the church, right? Yeah. We're not all the pastor. We're not all on the worship team. We're not all, we all have a role to play. And I feel we also all have a role to play in our political sphere. We all have a voice that needs to be a part of that sphere, because that's the sphere that is changing or just deciding what goes on in our world that we live in. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you to speak into that, and to for the people listening who maybe feel like they don't have a place or a seat at the table that they don't necessarily feel like they have a voice that people should listen to.
Yeah, this might be a little controversial, but that's okay. You use the body of Christ as an example, right? And I'll draw that same correlation on both sides. Not everyone can be a pastor or a worship leader or a kids ministry volunteer or anything. But the commonality between all of them is they all give. They're all generous, and they all contribute their finances to a bigger picture. So the first thing I would say is...
And their time.
Yeah, and they commit their time. Those two things. Give your time and give your financial resources. Those two things would actually move the needle for most political campaigns. And then the second part to that, I think, is have conversations, right? Like, even though we may not all be pastors or worship leaders or whatever, we're all called to be disciple makers. And so just like we have conversations in maybe a small group or a connect group, or we are discipling somebody in a ministry team, or like, we are all called to do that. The same thing is true in the political space. Maybe you're not meant to be the candidate and the person who's putting their name in the ring, but you can certainly have conversations. You can open up doors and raise topics around those things. And it's kind of funny because the two topics that you avoid at Thanksgiving and Christmas, right, are like religion and politics.
The two very most important things.
The two very most important things. So if you're a Christian and you're already engaged in the religion aspect, why not throw politics in the middle of it? Just be that person. It's fun.
Amen.
So I think those are the two things for me. That it's like your time and your resources, and then have conversations. Start having conversations. Open up the door and start politically, like at the local level. And then the only other thing I would say too is get educated.
Oh yeah.
Get educated, because like no one listens to an unqualified Christian in the way, and sometimes they do, which is even worse.
Yeah.
But like, read your Bible, right? Like, like you need to know the word in order to be able to disciple someone. Well, you need to know what's going on in your city. You need to know the propositions that are on the ballot. You need to know the candidates that are putting their names in the ring. You need to know what's going on, especially in your local level, to know what's really happening. You should, and this is funny because most people probably would never do this, go onto your government website and look at the budget. Where's the money getting spent? Where is it going? Is your city doing well? Is it not doing well? Like we hear the billions of dollars being sent over here, the billions of dollars like federally that are being sent here and there and there. Like, but look at your local level. What's going on there? Yeah. And I bet you that would start to anger quite a few people if they really start to understand where the money's actually going. And
all their tax dollars.
Yeah. And we don't really think about that stuff, right? Like even like a 50-cent sales tax. Like, nobody thinks about that. That's what got me started in this whole thing, was a 50-cent sales tax. Chula Vista's sales tax right now is 9 1/4 for every dollar. And it's like, you add another half a penny. It's like, no one thinks anything about that.
Yeah.
They don't really feel it, but it adds a lot of money. $20 million a year get added to the budget when you do that for 10 years.
Wow.
And so it adds up, but you need to know, where's that money going?
Yeah.
And the $1 million question is always, what happens at the end of 10 years? And what ends up happening with those taxes is they become permanent.
Yep. They
end up rolling over and just getting folded into everything else is happening. And they end up going to the general fund, and all of those things end up happening. So not to digress on that, but like, get educated, know what's going on in your city, know what's going on in politics, have conversations, and then contribute your time and your energy, your money.
Yeah. And ask questions.
Yeah.
Ask questions. If you have questions, go to meetings, ask questions. Our leaders are there, and they have, like, it's funny how many meetings people just don't go to. Mm-hmm. It's like they're open to the public, and you look at something and you have this question about this proposition or this thing that's coming down the pipeline, and you just don't go to the meeting. Like, I think that San Diego has been doing a really good job lately, and I feel like just across the board, cities have been people have been starting to wake up because of what happened 3 years ago. I just don't even want to acknowledge what actually happened, but I feel like we're all living in the PTSD of that.
We are.
But in order for us to keep stuff like that from happening again, we need people to stay active and not to just like, okay, well, 2020 happened and now we're in 2023 and I could just stop going to these meetings or I could stop paying attention. That's not the case. You got to keep paying attention.
Yeah. And a cool trick too is every city is required to post their agenda for any city council meeting in advance, at least 48 hours in advance. But you can also set alerts. So if you go on to the city government website, you can use keywords and set alerts for anything that you would be interested in to be notified when something goes onto the agenda that you think matters. And so I encourage you, like, get on the website, go create an alert that sends you an email whenever there's something on the agenda that would matter to you. If that's kids, if that's entertainment, if that's parks, if it's roads, if it's whatever those things are, if it's churches, it's like you'd be surprised on things that end up getting on agendas. But whatever those things are, go set an alert, because most people aren't going to go jump on there every single week and figure out what's on the agenda, but just take the guesswork out of it. Go set an alert so that you get notified when something matters that applies to you.
That's so good. Yeah. Oh, so good, Chris. I'm so glad you're on with me. Is there anything else that you would want to say? Any parting words before we close?
I think the only thing is we as like Christians, we need to engage politics. Like, so get involved. Like, do what you can. Use the time, the resources, the energy you have to get involved, because if we don't do it, then who is?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the thing.
That's
kind of the thing that's a little scary to me, is like the Bible says, right, like when the righteous rule, the people celebrate, right? The people are happy. And we find ourselves in a dynamic where that's not the case, and we can acknowledge that those people aren't righteous, right? We know that based off of what they say and what they do. But then if we are discouraging people from getting involved politically, or we are not doing it ourselves, then really we're coming into alignment with that, and we're kind of just abdicating our responsibility of meeting the expectation of that verse. And we're basically saying, well, there aren't any righteous candidates, and I don't want to be the one to do it. So therefore, the people are just going to be sad and frustrated and mad. Yeah. And we're just going to live with it. And we're just going to, like, I don't know who has this quote and where it comes from, but like the idea that like you're so heavenly minded, you do no earthly good. Ooh. and I think the tendency is that you're so heavenly minded, you do no earthly good. Oof. And I think the thing for a lot of Christians is that like you can, yes, Jesus, yes, we're saved by grace. Yes, we love the Lord. Yes, we get to celebrate with our family and friends in heaven one day. But now, and we have a mandate, right? Like, go and make disciples is what Jesus told us to go do. And that applies to other areas of life. That's not just, hey, go convert someone to be a Christian. Like, it's to make them disciples. And we should be engaged in the political sphere. If we're going to take the environment that we're meant to create, to bring heaven to earth, right? Like in in the Lord's Prayer, right? On earth as it is in heaven. If that's what we're like asking to happen, that doesn't happen by the miraculous of like God just saying, well, you asked for it to be, heaven on earth, so I'm just going to do it like however you say. Like, there's action required on our part. So if we're going to pray the Lord's Prayer, we should do the parts that are in our responsibility, the things that are in our hands. And politics is one of those things. Yeah. So go get involved, go get engaged, go be a part of it.
Faith without works is dead.
Yep. Thank you, James.
Well, thank you so much for being on with me today. Yeah. It was a pleasure having you and all of your wisdom. And I can't wait for when you run for office one day and to support you and have you back on here and tell the world what you're up to. But it's been so great. And thank you again for being on with me today.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to share it and make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss an episode. Now go out in the world and make disciples. We'll catch you in the next one.